so here we are, and it's just fantastic. And so let's go ahead and proceed. I'm going to introduce Rene to start off. um, and I'm so honored to be here with you today. It is a pleasure. Rene is an American bestselling novelist, licensed investigator, and former chief investigator at a public defense firm. And she's worked on hundreds of cases, including death row innocence work, rape, trafficking victims, and other trauma-intensive investigations. Lives in Portland, Oregon. She's a foster and adoptive mother, deeply involved with children and justice issues. Her writing bridges literary fiction, but it's really a weaving, an incredible weaving of magical realism, psychological insight, and social commentary. She has published 4 books: The Enchanted, The Child Finder, Sleeping Giants, Butterfly Girl. And she has a book coming out, which I will let her tell us about in a minute, in April, I do believe. The Enchanted, her debut fiction novel, won the French Prix du Premier Roman Étranger. I probably butchered that.
Don't ask me to pronounce it.
An ALA Medal for Excellence in Fiction, was listed for the Carnegie Medal, and was a finalist for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize. It's an amazing, amazing book. Like, I sleep with it. Let me see. Where is it? Where did I put it? Here it is. You guys got to read this. I'm telling you. And anyway, I just love that book so much. But I love all of your books, of course, and all of your work. The New York Times named her a Hero of the Year in 2017. She wrote an incredible essay about her fostering through adoption that was published in the New York Times on modern love. And I suggest you go look that up as well. So if you haven't, met Rene or heard of Rene, you're probably in for a real treat, because you can just dive in and explore all of her books. So I think what I want to start with is, really, your work is all about justice. And you're really interrupting the cultural and institutional narratives about justice, I think, and what justice really is. So I'd love to start with that. First, tell us a little bit about your upcoming book, and then we'll dive in to talk a little bit about how you define justice and what that's all about for you.
Sure. I actually just got the galleys for my upcoming novel, and they're right in the other room. So in a minute or two, I'm going to have to go grab a copy. The cover's beautiful. It's actually coming out in July with HarperCollins, and it's called The Talking Bone. It's my 5th novel, and this one is directly inspired by my work exonerating innocence. And I'm going to have to stop myself from going way into detail with the justice work. But so basically, I actually have my license right here, because after we're done with this, I still do the justice work. In fact, now, because of everything that's going on, I'm doing it more than ever, and it's very much all hands to the table, all boots to the ground. So I have a lot of cases right now. This is my little license.
Cool. Hold that up so we can see it.
Yeah, so I'm a licensed investigator in the state of Oregon. And being a licensed investigator, for instance, so we're licensed by the same agency that licenses detectives, requires hundreds of hours of training, experience. I have a strict code of ethics, and I have worked hundreds of cases in almost 20 years of doing this. And so, as you mentioned, I used to work for public defenders, and now I do contract work. I've exonerated innocents. I've worked on political asylum. I just all sorts of cases. I do a lot of work with children. In the United States, we like to try to sentence children as young as 10, 11, 12 to prison as adults. So I work those cases. So long story short, been doing this work for many years, and I finally felt like I was ready to write about the plight of people that are falsely convicted. And
Mm.
as you know, my work, I don't just it always comes out in a kind of more lyrical way. So I feel it's just so important to stay connected to the hope and the magic and the beauty of life, which I feel like actually, perhaps not ironically, because of my life and my work, I'm just always very connected to those aspirations, the aspirations of justice, which we can talk about. And so I finally felt ready, and I sat down and wrote this book, and it's mostly a story about a woman who is fighting to exonerate a man who was falsely convicted. And there's a lot of other
Oh.
elements of it, yes.
Oh, I really look
Mhm.
forward to that. I can't wait to
Oh,
read it.
I'm really excited about it. It really came from the heart. I think it's very poetic and it's very realistic, but it's also has this kind of dreamy, you know me, there's some magical realism
Yeah.
elements to it. And I find it just, a very hopeful story in the end because it really illustrates how much change we can make. And that's something I feel tied to just so deeply. I mean, it's something I feel really lucky to experience is I'm always constantly part of change and part of hope. So that's
Yeah.
the book in a nutshell.
So, yes, and, all of your books are from the heart.
Yeah.
And you wrote something recently on, on Substack, a little post. It started, "I wanna tell you a story."
Oh. Mhm.
And that's what you do. You tell us a story in such beautiful ways, and you have a very lyrical, poetic voice. I might read an excerpt here and there as we go on, but, you talked about that magic, regarding writing and, rather than pursuing for people who are writers who might be listening, rather than pursuing, a book, to focus on the story.
Yeah, and that's something, that's just a huge part of my life in general because it may seem like there's a disparity between my justice work and my novels, but actually I see them as these two twin passions I have, and they're both about story. We tell stories in this country. We have these stories that are actually, I think, are often myths or falsehoods about crime and violence, for instance. And then we have the real stories, the truthful stories about what life is really like, or the true story behind somebody that's been falsely convicted, or the true story behind women and trauma and cults and victimization. And so the justice work is all about telling the true story. And the novels are also another way of telling the story. Um, so if people are interested, I actually have a Substack I recently started, and I'm just sharing craft advice and also just storytelling advice because I think as someone who has been lucky enough to sell several novels, what I see is a lot of aspiring writers really get caught up in understandably, we get caught up in this dream of having been published. We all wanna sell a book.
Yeah.
But I also, I coach, aspiring writers, particularly writers from marginalized backgrounds, and what I see people get lost in, and this has happened to me too, we get lost in this dream of getting published. So much that we can lose ourselves in trying to, like, for instance, chase the market. And there's always this advice out there about what's selling. And I think that that's really dangerous advice to follow because there's, just trying to duplicate and be somebody that's producing a product. That's not what it's about.
Mm. Yeah.
It's not about products. It's about the story that you want to tell.
Yeah, and that is such a seductive thing, and I have
Mhm.
been, seduced by that myself, and mostly, my path is one of, to thine own self be true, and so, that's a daily practice, and it's very easy to lose yourself, and in that writing aspiration, that definitely, is a danger that I've experienced, that I've gotten lost in being too focused on the end result.
Yeah.
And, it's like, I just need to write my story, like you said,
Mhm.
and stay, and like you said, I think you said something about staying connected to the story.
Yeah, I think it really helps to it's good to learn the craft. These are really important things. We don't have to learn the craft, though, the ways that people tell us to learn the craft. I don't have an MFA, for instance. I think it's great if other people do, but there's a lot of ways that we can learn the craft, and it's important to stay connected to that. But I love what you said to that, to being about being true to yourself. And what happens, I think, a lot of times is we have this dream of getting published because what it's really about is we want someone to hear us.
Yes. Yes.
We want someone to finally hear and see our story. And that's like
Mhm.
the most legitimate thing in the world. But the way to get there is not necessarily to chase the tail of publishing. And because it's kinda publishing is kinda like a dog chasing its tail, it's
Yeah.
there's always we're always being told that we need to do this, we need to do that, and in my experience, the further we get from the story that is really our voice, the story we want other people to hear, actually, the chances of getting it into the world actually start dimming, if that makes sense. We have a better chance of being authentic to ourselves and seeing what happens with the story.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. It's like I have to stay focused and centered in, I think you do talk about the imagination. And I need to stay centered in that and follow that direction and guidance versus something out here that's going, that I'm wanting that validation. I'm wanting my voice to be heard. I think that's really, really true what you just said about that we all want to be heard. And so many our voices have been silenced and never heard. And so the publishing is, a way to get heard. And I think that's what we're doing on Substack too, is that
Yeah.
we're we're, getting out there and and wanting our voice to be heard. And for me, Substack actually helped me a lot with this because it helped me focus on my writing rather than on getting published.
Yeah,
So I
exactly,
just
and yeah, and
yeah.
there's so many different ways to be heard. I think that we have this status kind of orientation in our culture, which we pick up whether we want to or not. We think that there's legitimate ways to be heard and other ways that are not as good, and that's just a whole bunch of bullshit. And I think you're right, Substack is really good for this. I mean, if we're being authentic to ourselves and telling the true stories of ourselves, in my mind, it's better to be heard by a small group of people if I'm telling the real story.
Mhm.
That's a form of justice in and of itself,
Oh,
you know?
wow. Say more about that.
Well, it's like if I'm working on a case, so the beautiful thing about my justice work is it's all confidential. So for 20 years I've been a professional keeper of secrets. And I work these cases. And many times, no one ever knows what I did. I have exonerated people and no one knows it. Because maybe the district attorney, for instance, dismissed the charges because I found evidence that the client was innocent. Nobody knows this. I don't even tell my children. I don't tell anyone. I think that's like the most amazing thing in the world because we live in this culture where we feel like everybody has to see us or hear us for us to exist and be real, or
Mm,
for the story to matter. But what matters to me in that particular instance is that one innocent person that I freed. That's the story that counts. And it doesn't
yeah.
matter if a million people know it or no one knows it. That's the real story. I know it, that person knows it. And if I really value the sanctity of their life and if I value justice, then that's the only story that needs to be told. It's a story between me and that person. And so when I'm looking at writing,
Yeah.
I have some of my novels are more commercially successful than others. But the novel you talked about, The Enchanted, to me, That's an example of a story that I am content if only a handful of people read, because it's an authentic, true story for
Mhm.
me. And so, I guess I'd just like to push back against this idea that we have to be successful in some conventional way. I mean, if only a handful of people hear our story, that might be more satisfying to us than publishing something that's not authentic and having what's considered a more conventional form of success. But you're talking to somebody who's always poor. and and I have no conventional success in many ways, so I'm probably not the person to be giving advice on what success is.
Well, I don't know. I think you have a real healthy view of success. And I'm aligned with that same view. I definitely see that our integrity and living in integrity
Mhm.
is success, and that's the true success. You
Absolutely.
know, and I do believe there's an illusion about that once you get a book. I mean, you know this because you have 4, almost 5 books published now. So once you get a book published, there's an illusion that, now you've arrived or, I don't know, something is going to happen, but the magic is really in the process and the art in the making that you do. And, it's just like anytime I get an essay published, because I haven't had a book published, of course. Not of course, I shouldn't say that. I haven't had a book published, but every time I get an essay published, it's like it's exciting that it gets out there, and I want it to be read, and I think readers do complete the circle. It's almost like what you
Mhm,
said about between you and the person who you helped exonerate, and that privacy, and that maybe
mhm,
nobody else ever knows it. But for me, that's what readers feel like to me, real readers, is like they're the one that complete the circle.
mhm.
So
That's
I want
beautiful.
I want that circle to be completed by having it received by a reader, but it's not about the acclaim or the fame
Mhm,
or some kind of magical transportation into, I don't know, being enough finally or something, because so many of us come from a place of feeling like if we don't achieve success in the way that this culture conditions and programs us to believe that it looks like, that we're somehow a failure, we don't count, our voice is not heard. And like you said, our voice is actually heard in many, many different ways, and we need to think about and be aware of that. And that's really helpful to me. I thank
yeah.
you for that.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I mean, the way I think of it, I love how you put that, is I think of it as readers and writers are on the same side. We're the same in a way. We're all gathered around the fire of story.
Yeah.
And we're sitting around the fire telling story, listening to story, hearing story, feeling story. And when you tell your story, and I love the stories you're telling on Substack because they're so fucking real. And you're telling your story and I'm receiving it and hearing it. That's what counts. And I think, what you touched upon is really important, and I think it's so good for us women to talk about this, is we've been conditioned into these certain conventions of what it means to be a successful woman. And my whole life, I feel like because of my background, I've been pushing against that. I was raised in
Mhm.
real poverty and experienced a lot of trauma as a child. So I kind of knew I was never going to be a traditionally successful woman because was already kind of considered, damaged goods, so to speak. And and so things like, to be a conventionally successful woman, for instance, we're supposed to want to have biological children. We're supposed to want to get married. We're supposed to want to
Mhm.
have a certain job. And when we become a mother, there's a never ending list of all the ways that we're supposed to be the perfect mom. And if you notice something over time, all of those expectations have a way of keeping us very small and contained and
Yep.
afraid of going out into the world and just telling our story. Just on the motherhood thing, I thought it was so interesting as a mom that even as our lives should be getting easier, our society invents more and more things for us to do.
Yeah.
Um, It's like it's not enough just to feed your kids. You have to feed your kids perfectly. It's not enough to like have them go play outside. You have to take them to 8,000 sports events or
Yep.
whatever. So, I think it's just so good for us to, as women, to push back against these ideas of what success is that are not really success. They're ways to make us very conventional.
Yes, and those are like the way that I think about that is that's the story writing me.
Ah,
I need to flip
yeah.
that around and be the one who writes the story.
Mhm,
So, and that's what you're really doing in your books regarding human lives and flipping those stories around so that the reader enters the world of the character and is able to understand. You talk about understanding. You talk about that in The Enchanted, about understanding, and you talk about it in Childfinder too. I think probably all of your books.
mhm.
You're really maybe talk about that understanding
Oh,
because
yeah.
entering the world of another, and I don't know how I got that from out of story, but I'm sure
Yeah.
it's there. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I think it absolutely is, and that's one of the beautiful things that we can do as writers and as storytellers is, like, when you're going out there and telling your truth, which is the truth, it's we're pushing back against these cultural narratives that you
Right.
mentioned earlier. We've all kind of been indoctrinated into these, whether we kind of are aware of it or not. And that's one thing I really try to do heavily in my novels. One of my favorite reviews actually talked about of my books, talked about how I often write characters that come from poverty and trauma. And she said something about how I allow my characters to have whimsy and joy and humor. And I felt very validated that this reviewer saw that because as someone who came from a lot of poverty and trauma myself, I feel like there's these stereotypes, for instance, that people from my background aren't supposed to have any. I guess the convention is like our innocence has been destroyed. And I feel like, no, I'm just as innocent as I ever
Mm.
was.
Oh,
In
I
fact
love that.
in fact,
Yeah.
I think I'm more innocent than I ever was.
Ah,
And so I just want to push back at this concept for me. It doesn't work for somebody to say that somebody else took my innocence. It's like, no, that belongs to me. My innocence belongs to me. And
oh,
yeah,
I
I'm
love
like,
that.
yeah. And so when I'm writing, I can bring these kind of ideas into it, and especially when I'm writing about people that have been disenfranchised, people that have been exploited, people that have been victims of terrible injustice and oppression. I have a chance, I feel, to tell these stories that often aren't told, or when they are told, they're told in ways that turn those experiences into stereotypes or tropes.
Yes.
And that's something I really try to push back against. I think a lot of writers who are very well intentioned, nevertheless, will
Mhm.
promote these certain stereotypes of events or people. And those of us that
Yes.
have the experiences, like you with your experiences, you can write about what the reality really is.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
you're breaking those narratives. Those are narratives that we are I mean, having been born and raised in a cult, which I write about,
Mhm.
I'm very indoctrination is endemic, and we're indoctrinated on all levels of society in every area. So you don't have to be born and raised in a cult to be indoctrinated, but having been born and raised in one, I'm very familiar with with that indoctrination, so it's like a real, um, extreme, I guess. It can be maybe an extreme example, but we have this indoctrination of what things look like and what they're supposed to look like and what is so-called normal, and you really do. That's what I love about your books is that you really take us into the world, of the character so that we understand from the inside out what it is to be that person rather than our stereotype of somebody who's on death row, for example, or somebody who's in jail, or somebody who's, in living in poverty, or maybe on drugs, or, you know, has been victimized, or
Mhm.
all of the things that we superimpose on that, and of course, why do we do that? Because we want to distance ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah. And you wrote about something recently that I think just nailed it, which is people that have our backgrounds. Actually, we have this kind of superpower of discernment because I think
Hmm.
you wrote about having grown up in a cult when there's an inherent that kind of healthy skepticism that you have. That when I don't
Yeah.
think I don't think you use those words, but it's this kind of idea that these things can actually become our strengths because we might have an awareness. I was, for instance,
Hmm. Yeah.
I was homeless as a child, and I'll tell you that being homeless gives you a hell of a perspective. And one of the perspectives I have is how much your life can change. That how you can be the same person inside, and depending on your life circumstances, someone can look at you with contempt or pity or disgust. I was the same person then than I am now. So I think that we can develop this kind of sense of like being willing to really look at things and situations with a healthy and sense of analysis, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
And being writers, we have the opportunity to then bring that awareness to the stories we tell and to question things. For instance, I with my justice work, I have certain awareness about the realities of how often, for instance, innocent people get convicted, or what it's like for children who go to prison, or what it's like for victims. Are we really doing victims the right justice in our system? I think many times we're not. We
No.
talk about it, but no, we're not serving victims either. We manage to incarcerate millions of people a year in this country, and I think it's really up for question how much that's really advancing genuine justice. Is it really preventing crime? Is it helping victims heal? These are all questions that I really kind of hope in my novels to at least gently raise so that we can have more kind of public dialogue about it.
Yeah, and that's so beautiful because, of course, I believe that we could talk about
Making my tea.
in the industrial prison system,
Mm.
and we could really go far into that, but your books really do, in a beautiful, poetic, magical way, introduce the reader to think, different thoughts, to think differently about all of those things and about all of the people that are easily marginalized and sidelined and just warehoused and just swept aside, and what we're dealing with, I have to at least acknowledge it because of the work that you do and ask you about it, is what's going on right now, in the country and globally with this, the underbelly being exposed, the curtains being pulled back on all institutions, and, I guess maybe not enough on the prison system, but definitely on the justice system, right?
Yeah, and actually, I think oh my
In
gosh,
case I
we can
didn't say it in case I didn't say it, I'm talking about the Epstein files,
yeah.
okay?
Yeah, and well, oh gosh, I wish we could talk for hours about this because it's so isn't it just so layered? I mean, there's just so much to talk about. Um, and like a lot of people who have gone through things, you and I are the not surprised kind of people.
Yeah,
One of my hopes through this is that we might see more of an awakening to the realities of injustice in this country.
yeah,
That we have, because I work largely indigent defense. I work with poor people. And what happens to a poor person in this country, particularly in terms of the criminal justice system, it's like there's two countries. There's the country for poor people and people of
Mhm.
color, and then there's the country for wealthier people. And you look at, for instance, death rows, you look at prisons. There's no I've I've never met a rich person. I'm sure that,
Hello?
yeah, it's a completely different world. It's a world where a poor person can end up in prison because of unpaid traffic fines, because they ran out of formula for the baby, so they stole it. From
Mhm.
so many, because
Mhm.
of addiction issues, because of mental health issues, because they're a veteran that has a traumatic brain injury. And I could just tell you so many stories of instances where, you know, not just preventable, but completely avoidable instances. And then we have
Mhm.
the billionaire class and what they've gotten away with and the trafficking. And I'm actually kind of interested to hear where your heart's kind of lays right now with the issue. I mean, I guess I would just say I'm not surprised. And I think from my experiences as an investigator, what they've released is probably a tiny fraction, and it's probably not, I would guess, not saying I know, but in my experience, there's probably what is unseen is is probably even more heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And people are absolutely horrified by what they're seeing and would not even guess how bad it can, like you said, maybe the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah.
So, I don't feel I'm not surprised like you said. It's not a surprise. I have the same hope that you have is that there's an awakening and that people, wake up to the injustice that is far beyond any injustice they've ever had to face or think about, and how we are all complicit in that in many different ways and many different layers in the way that we live our lives, and whether or not we are awake or conscious, or whether or not we are looking at the truth and seeing the truth, or whether we're denying that and don't want to see it. It's hard to look at. It's hard. For
Yeah.
me, it's hard,
I
um
there's a wonderful writer, Chris Rice. I think you probably know of
Mhm.
Chris.
Yeah, she's great.
Yeah, she's on Substack, and for people that haven't found her, she writes about growing up, foster care, these kind of issues. Fabulous writer, and she made a point recently about what's not being discussed is the issue of class. That these
Oh, yeah,
girls
yeah, yeah,
the girls that are trafficked and traumatized are often the throwaway girls, the poor girls, the girls that don't have the resources. And I think, I'm hopeful that there's going to be more awakening to that. We have an awakening to the illusion of safety and protection for women in this
yes,
country. The awakening to the idea that we are safe if we do it right, or we're safe if we go along with the status quo. The illusion that
yeah.
we're protecting girls. You
That's
know,
so important, that
yeah.
illusion of if we go along, and like, what was it, Audre Lorde or Adrienne Rich,
Hmm.
one of them said
Hmm.
something about, you can be silent, but it won't protect you. Your silence will not protect you.
Yeah.
Ultimately, and it won't protect your daughters and your sisters and
Hmm.
your loved ones. But there's an illusion that it will.
Yeah. There's the illusion that, going back to what we were talking about before, I think the illusion that if we do everything right, and if we're the perfect girl and we become the perfect woman, that we'll be safe.
Yeah.
And, maybe yeah, but not collectively. No, no, we're not.
Well, and the thing you said about poor girls is absolutely, like, if you look at the victims of crimes,
Hmm.
women. and children, women and children primarily, and this happens to boys too, of course, is what you see is that the issue of grooming and the targets are people who are chosen because of their lack of power
Mm-hmm.
and their lack of resources and their, living in survival. So exactly, that's exactly um, who is selected. And and then I guess, we have and the issue of class, absolutely,
Mm-hmm.
101,000 1,000,000%. And the fact that any, women who believe that proximity to power, which we're watching as well,
Mm-hmm.
Pam Bondi and the proximity to power, that proximity to power will somehow protect us.
Yeah.
And you see him be getting thrown under the bus, Marjorie
Mm-hmm.
Taylor Greene, other examples. It does not that proximity is to me, that's all it is, and of course, I understand how, you know, it's like you say about understanding someone else's world. I can put myself in the shoes of women who choose that proximity and understand at some level because I know survival.
Yeah.
What they're doing and why. And so
Mm-hmm.
can you, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
this is the effing fucking world we're living in.
Yeah, I think of it as paying someone the respect of understanding. And that's a lot different than enabling or an endorsing. It's just like, I'm
Yes.
going to pay you the respect of understanding why you're doing what you're doing. But that doesn't mean I have to go along with it or enable or endorse
Right.
and particularly, I think that's really important for us collectively as women to do because otherwise we can get into a situation where powerful white women who are committing harm kind of get the pass from other women. It's like, "No, I'm not doing that. I'm gonna pay you the
No,
respect of
no, no.
understanding
Yeah.
exactly
Mhm.
what is going on." And what you said, about the poor girls, I think just is just super important because it also needs to be we need to stay aware that because of capitalism, these are profitable enterprises for people. Mass incarceration is a profitable
Yeah.
enterprise. And mass incarceration laid the groundwork for mass detainments. Everything we're seeing in the detention centers was actually groundwork that was laid through mass incarceration. For instance, um, contract businesses that are making money. People have made a ton of money off mass incarceration. Um, every
Privatization. It's privatization.
Yeah,
And that's yeah.
private is not just private prisons, but so just really quickly. So I live in Oregon, and this is
Mhm.
example of how the profit works. We don't have private prisons here, but we have state prisons that pay billions of dollars in contracts to companies that then
There
are
yeah.
that are supposed to provide food or medical care, and they've all been sued by people working in the legal field. Um, so all of the groundwork for like making a detention center, hiring companies that are going to make money serving substandard food that might have worms or maggots in it, more money being made off of substandard health care. I mean, these are all profitable industries, and I think that we just need to acknowledge that there are industries that are making money off of more injustice
Yes.
being perpetuated against poor people.
Yes,
Mhm.
injustice is profitable.
It is, very much
And
so.
and the illusion of justice is an illusion.
You know
I don't see that really happening in our
Yeah.
system. I don't think it's ever happened, and I think that our eyes are being opened to that reality and that it is class-based, as I love Chris said,
Mhm.
and that it's, it's all, grounded in, of course, capitalism and profit. I don't know if it's the system of capitalism that creates that or if it's the, um greedy people who abuse it, or maybe
Yeah.
probably a combination of both. you know?
Probably, I think it's a combination of both.
Yeah.
I mean, you could have a capitalist society with more guardrails against the exploitation, but we've kind of taken off all the guardrails and just said, "Woo,
Yeah.
let's just exploit the hell out of these systems." But I do want to say really quick, you know, there's so much injustice and oppression, but I feel particularly lucky because of my justice work because almost every day I get to see that justice can happen. And we've had so many wins and so many instances where, like, for instance, I have exonerated innocent people or I have helped people and seen justice prevail. And I also know that there's a lot of well-intentioned, good-hearted people that are out there
Mhm.
trying to do the same. So I feel very lucky because I think I've experienced firsthand that what we do actually can make a difference. Which is why I really encourage people to get involved in any way they can because we can independently all make just a huge difference in what's happening, and I think we're seeing that right now, actually.
Yeah. That's why I love you. Thank you for
Well
bringing that to us because that's the light and the spark and the hope and the magic and, the innocence and, thank you for preserving that. We are coming to the time. We're coming to the time, and I wanna say a couple things, as we do that, and I wanna end on that magical note. But, we did have a late start. We had technical issues, and I will be sharing the recorded video. A lot of people probably missed this live stream. So, I would really like to do another one.
Yes.
So, we will definitely do that, and we'll dive deeper. And I wanna end with, the thing about imagination, that one of the things you said when I interviewed you about Child Finder and the Rumpus is you talked about, you think that you don't really like the term resilience. And you talked about imagination and how important imagination is. Um, and then in your essay about, writing the story and chasing not chasing the book, but writing the story, you talked about imagination, really about, I think do you think that that gets conditioned out of us?
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. I think that's I the way I look at it is, we talk about resiliency a lot in our culture, but
mhm,
I see imagination as a true form of resiliency, 'cause, when I went through really tough things as a child, it was actually my imagination that
yeah,
saved me. I think that actually having an imagination and being able to dream is a profoundly radical act,
yeah,
because that you think about, like, you know, we can imagine ourselves in a better situation. We can imagine ourselves fighting back. I can imagine that I'm gonna go solve a case. And when we start imagining, we're letting ourselves know that we have the power to do these things. And what I've experienced with people that have been incarcerated, particularly with clients that have been incarcerated for a very long time, it's often their imagination that saves them. 'Cause
yeah.
your imagination is the one thing that no one can ever take from you.
Oh my god,
Yeah.
yes.
And so when I'm writing a story in particular, I like to bring that to the table, and I think our imaginations are the one things. I mean, it's so incredibly powerful to have an imagination, and that whether people intend it or not, that's something that our culture is trying to consistently devalue and
Yes,
remove. If you just look at, like, education and the focus on, like, learning to regurgitate instead of I think a good education actually focuses on encouraging imagination, but we devalue the very thing that can actually be the impetus for change.
yes, we
Yeah.
discourage it, as a child, I was told repeatedly that, I had a big imagination in a derogatory way,
Isn't that
you know
interesting? Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I sure did, and here I am,
Yeah.
still in that imagination, and I'm glad that they didn't kill it,
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I was often, I was in It's interesting. So as a child, I kind of left the world for a land of fantasy. I lived in a world of imagination as a child. And I think it's so interesting that our culture, instead of recognizing that that is a strength, being able to fantasize or daydream or losing yourself in imagination is a strength. Instead, we kind of turn it into a pathology.
Yes.
And we say, oh, that person's disassociating. And my response is like, honey, if you had the kind of childhood I had, disassociation is a survival tool. It's a powerful, healthy response to a world that is at least temporarily not safe for us. So these are actually powerful tools that we can harness, I think, as storytellers, and we can use, as forces for good in the world. It's like, I'm going to imagine a better world that's full of justice. And because I imagine it, I'm going to take this license
Yes.
I have and I'm going to go into the world and I'm going to bring justice to people. Or I'm going to imagine a story that comes from my heart and I'm going to sit down and write it. And so, whoever is watching this, for instance, as a writer, that's, what I like to encourage. And I feel lucky to be part of a community of writers. And I would love to think of us all kind of, writing those stories that come from the heart.
Yeah. And I think the limits of our world and what we can do is determined by our imagination.
Absolutely. Yes. And that's,
Yeah,
yeah. And no one can ever take that from us.
exactly. They cannot take that. And, do we have time for me to read a quick excerpt
Yes,
before
of
we
course.
close?
Yes,
I'm
please.
going to read something
Oh,
from The
it's from the
Enchanted.
okay.
Okay. And this is, there's this character, the lady, and she's an investigator who excels at uncovering information to save her clients from execution. And then there's the fallen priest. I just love these characters, who's beaten down by his guilt over a terrible sin and its tragic consequences. And so the lady and the fallen priest are having a conversation in this excerpt here, sort of in the middle toward the, yeah, wherever in the book. So I'll just read this. Well, if you understand what makes him tick, what is magic for him, then you can understand anyone, she says, the lady says. Yes, but I wasn't thinking of the word magic, says the fallen priest. It's magic, she says. The church has funny positions on magic. She shrugs, her shoulders thin under a warm blazer. It is always cold down here in the dungeon. I'm not talking black magic or even magic, she says. Not potions or prophecy or punishment. She stops and searches for the words, unconsciously leaning against his desk with one hip. He looks up at her, sees the feathery black hair framing her delicate pale face, while she thinks, I'm saying hopeful magic. I don't know this inmate, but I imagine he knows magic if he is reading books. The book itself doesn't matter. It's that he found another world in it. She looks down at the priest. His mouth is slightly ajar. Men like York, like Stryker, even men like Arden, they can see the magic, just like us. She tells him, no matter what they did, they can see the magic. I think your God would understand that. He may send them to the fires of hell, but he would understand that their eyes can be the same as ours. And their souls? She takes a breath. I'm sorry, he says automatically. Don't apologize. She smiles and collects her thoughts and shifts her body to accommodate them. Her small hand lands near his larger hand on the desk. I don't know, she finally says. What is a soul? Is it your magic? He asks. It could be, she smiles, and without thinking touches his hand.
Aw.
I just
Thank you.
love that. There's just so many things I could read. I love the first page too, but maybe next time.
Oh, yeah. No, thank you. I'm really honored that you had me on. And this is, I actually just very recently joined Substack, and I have to say, I think this is the first time I'm on a like a social media kind of app that I feel comfortable. I mean, it's just so
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
yeah, it's just amazing to be in the company of people like you, and I've, admire the hell out of you, and yeah,
Oh,
and
thank
just think,
you.
yeah. No, and I would be happy to come on again, and I especially love to encourage aspiring writers and people who are out there trying to do it because I remember I didn't get my first novel published until I was in my 40s. I had no social media platform. I did not have a conventional background. And so I love to encourage other people that are, kind of coming at it and trying to figure it out. So if people want to like send me a message or anything, I'm always happy to help if I can.
Yeah, Renee's Substack, she's giving away basically free writing advice, and so it's really amazing, and I encourage you to go and subscribe, and, you will find her at the Talking Bone, Renee
Mhm, mhm.
Denfeld, and, I think it's linked here in the live stream somewhere as well. So I appreciate this so much, and I look forward to having another live stream with you soon.
Yes,
So,
I hope before the book comes out. That would be
yeah.
great. Yeah.
I am, by the way, I do the Substack in case you haven't heard of me doing There's Nothing Wrong with You, and There Never Was. And
Mhm,
speaking to story and flipping the narrative and stuff, what I said recently is that, I don't write stories that are poor me, poor me. I write stories that are poor you because you don't know there's nothing wrong with you, or not poor you, poor them,
mhm,
because you don't like referring to the cult or these experiences I've had with oppression or
mhm,
suppression. So I write stories that are saying poor them because they don't know there's nothing wrong with them and there never
mhm,
was.
mhm.
So
Amen. There's
yeah.
nothing wr there's no there's nothing wrong with me.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with you. There never
There's
was. And
nothing
that's the key. There's nothing wrong with any of us. If we would get that, we would stop hurting each other, maybe.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Agreed.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Mwah. I love you.
All love. Yeah,
All
same.
right. All right,
Ditto.
I'll talk to you